Hello, and may the 4th be with you. Enchantment of Eternity here to cover Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. This is part of my ongoing mission to review every movie of Star Wars every year on May the 4th, as that is the official Star Wars holiday. I don't know how popular it still is or will be, but I'm still going to keep doing it. I've been doing it in release date order. So, did the original trilogy, did The Phantom Menace, so now it's time to review Attack of the Clones. Oh, the first thing I'll say first off is that's not a very good title. I've heard other people, it sounds like Attack of the Killer Tomato or just a silly B-movie title, and it doesn't actually fit this film because clones don't really attack until like the last 20 minutes of the film, and even then they're not attacking our heroes, they're attacking with our heroes. So why would you call it Attack of the... I don't know. They just wanted to get the word clones in there some way. So a couple main points I want to make about this film. First of all, this is a long-standing argument I've been getting in with people for decades, who the people who are not, insane, who actually believe the prequel trilogy is better than the original trilogy. I know they're not necessarily insane, they might just be young. They just grew up with the prequel trilogy and not the original trilogy, and I've met a lot of younger people who... and it's becoming more and more commonplace. But they're just... it doesn't matter what age you grew up in, like, they're just objectively wrong. Like, I did a review, I did a video a few years back comparing the two trilogies, and I was actually very fair to the prequel trilogy and saying that it's not as bad as everyone's saying is, because believe it or not, like 10 years ago or 9 years ago when I was doing my channel, maybe 8 years, around that time, the mid 2010s, it was like very commonplace to blast the prequel trilogies as shit. But that's before the Disney sequel trilogy came out, and then everyone turned their attention and their ire to that, and now they're like, oh, the prequel trilogy is a masterpiece, but because they're too focused on hating the Disney sequels. But back in the day, I'm not talking about 20 years ago, I'm talking about 8 years ago or 7 years ago, it was like overwhelming for people to say how much the prequels suck, and I disagreed with that assessment. And I did a video saying that the difference between the prequels and the original trilogy isn't that huge. And I pointed out that there's some things about the prequels I like better than the original trilogy, and I was saying the difference isn't that huge because the original trilogy is actually a bit overrated. It's not as great as people claim it out to me to be, and it had many problems, and I did cover those problems when I covered the first 3 films. As I said that A New Hope was too much like 50s or 60s Flash Gordon-esque serial that came off as a bit hokey at times, and Return of the Jedi had a lot of plot issues because there was a lot of behind the scenes problems with it, a lot of fuss and muss that kind of dampened the film a little bit, and it didn't turn out as good as it could have been, but it was still good. So Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion, was the only truly great film of the original trilogy. And the prequels are a bit smarter, actually, and I've definitely been noticing that as I was watching this film. The very nuanced texture to the prequel trilogy is actually really good, as it's about Darth Sidious sort of being a puppet master and orchestrating a war, but sort of profiting off of both sides of the war and using that to gain power, which he eventually does in the next film. And that is a very smart, a very complex, a very realistic plot line that's actually a lot better than the original trilogy's just good versus evil, which is, I know that it gets more complex than that, especially when you get into all the other spin-offs and shows and stuff that explore that Empire versus Rebellion fight better. But really, especially in the first Star Wars movie, it just came out good versus evil. And I think part of the reason why people didn't like the prequels is because they were expecting that. But what we got instead was a lot smarter, sort of more complex analysis that is more true to history and sort of explains explores the dangers of how a nation can lose democracy. But that being said, the original trilogy is objectively better than the prequels. I mean, that's something I said. A conclusion I came to in that video. That video was all about, the prequels aren't as bad as you think. They're actually pretty good. They're actually not that much worse than the original trilogies. But, objectively speaking, the original trilogy is better. And that is something I stand by. If people were born at a certain time and they grew up with the prequels and they are attached to it more and they like it more because it's what they know, that's fine. I mean, that makes sense. If they want to say they like the prequels better, fine. But and I know some people object to me saying objectively, but you can be somewhat objective when it comes to opinions on film. And I always give this example, is you could say, for example, looking at it from a craft perspective and not just opinion on do I like it or do I not like it, because just because something's better from a craft perspective doesn't mean you need to like it. Martin Scorsese and Stanley Kubrick's films are top notch and some of the best well-crafted films ever made. They're masters at crafting the film. I don't like their movies though. And just because it's crafted well doesn't mean you have to like it. And from that craft perspective, the same way that you could say that The Shawshank Redemption is better than Paul Blart Mall Cop, or that Schindler's List is better than the Michael Bay Transformers movies. Those are objective facts, really. I mean, as much as they can be. And that same token, from that craft perspective, especially listening to the horrible dialogue in this film, the original trilogy is better than the prequel trilogy, just for the way it's structured, the way it's acted, the way it's written, everything. But, so I just had to throw that out. But there's a few things I noticed about this thing, the movie. This is something I touched on when I covered Phantom Menace, but I'm going to bring it up again because it's very relevant. It's all that's on my mind. George Lucas should not have directed and written these films. I mean, that's not to say he shouldn't have been involved at all. Actually, he should have. And part of the reason why the Disney films suck so much is that he was not involved at all. But I'll get to that when I get to that. But so the formula that the original trilogy had was a great formula, and they shouldn't have fucked with it. That is, George Lucas had this vision. He came up with the story. He crafted the main plot points of the story out. He came up with the general idea of the Star Wars trilogy. And of course, that changed after they made the first film, and he explored more of the greater story and fleshed it out more. And he worked with the writer, a different writer, to write Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and they fought over different things. Some people wanted to Return of the Jedi to be darker in tone, or for Han Solo to be killed, but George Lucas was very much against that, and he ultimately won. And he got someone else to direct Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Both films much, much better. And that formula worked. Now, I talked about how in Phantom Menace, George Lucas was a yes man. Was surrounded by yes men. Sorry. And everyone was too afraid to challenge him. He's the auteur. He's the genius. But the thing is, as much as I do love George Lucas and that he's a beautiful, creative mind that is much better, has more creativity in his little finger than I have in my entire body, and he responsible for creating this complex universe and crafting these great stories. But he's a shit director. Facts are facts. I'm sorry, that's just true. And that's why Empire Strikes Back was so fucking good, because he recognized, I'm going to produce this film. I'm going to oversee the script. I'm going to oversee the story. I'm going to have final say on everything, but I'm going to get a very good director to direct it. He was kind of hugging the prequels too close to his vest, and that was the major issue with the prequels. And I can see that, watching Attack of the Clones and listening to this terrible dialogue and seeing these bad performances out of these great actors. It's not the actor's fault that these performances are bad. It's the fucking director. And the dialogue that is written so terribly. And so, yeah, George Lucas surrounding himself by yes men and getting this producer guy who would boss everyone around and make sure they did whatever he said was the absolutely wrong decision to make. He should have had some more humility and realized, look, he's not an auteur. He's not a Stanley Kubrick. He's not a Christopher Nolan. He's not a Steven Spielberg who can write and direct and have the grand vision. He's just not. He is not to that level, and that's not to demean him. As I said, re-emphasize, he has more creativity in his little finger than I have in my entire body. He's one of the most creative minds in film history and created a masterpiece, and so he should be commended a lot. But this does not mean he's an auteur, and nothing wrong with that. Not everyone's an auteur. Not everyone is, can write, direct, and know the ins and outs of everything. It's he's a great producer. He's great at visual effects. He's great at world building, which was lacking from the goddamn sequel trilogy. But again, I'll get to that when I get to that. And he's great at crafting stories. But he's not good at writing specific scripts. He's not good at writing dialogue. And he is not good at directing actors. And so, as I was watching this film and listening to the stilted dialogue, Anakin and Obi-Wan, when they're sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're sort of banter, that they're always going back and forth. Sounds very Marvel-esque, actually, and this was before the MCU ever happened. And that's actually typical of Star Wars. You look at the original trilogy, their dialogue was very, like that as well, the banter and the riffing and whatnot. And so that was true. But in the original trilogy, it actually worked. Whereas here, it felt weird. Thinking of that scene with Obi-Wan and Anakin in the elevator when, I can't remember the exact words, but Obi-Wan was saying something like, oh, if you were that good, you'd be able to save my hide. And Anakin's like, well, I did save your hide on that planet, remember? And Obi-Wan does this really fucking fake laugh. He goes, oh, yeah, I remember that. And again, Ewan McGregor is an outstanding actor, so when he's giving a stilted bad performance, it is not his fault. It is the script's fault. It is the director's fault. And I've seen great actors give bad performances when they're paired with a bad script and a bad director. And let me re-emphasize, that's not to say I think the entire story of Attack of the Clones sucks. I don't. As I said, there's so much good. There's so much complexity. The idea is good. The general story that Lucas put together is awesome. but he needed someone else to work out the fine details. He needed someone else to get the dialogue better and the acting better. And it's just throughout the entire film. Let me state the obvious, something that everyone points out. The love scenes between Anakin and Padme are some of the most cringy bullshit that you ever seen. And so many people make fun of it, particularly the sand. As soon as I saw that scene, I was like, I hate sand. I just couldn't help but laughing because there's people just memed the fuck out of that. That just became such a running joke of people always bringing that up. And I constantly seeing memes on my Facebook feed about how Anakin hates sand. Where sand is his worst enemy and stuff like that. And that's because it's bad dialogue. He just seems to say it out of nowhere, and it doesn't. It's like, okay, you hate sand, okay. It's just so bad. And the main obvious thing is that Anakin comes off as a total stalker, like creep, who is absolutely insidious. And then Padme all of a sudden says, I truly, deeply love you. And I love the pitch meeting when they talked about this, when the writer's like, that's absolutely how women talk. Oh my god. And you're thinking, what the fuck is wrong with you, Padme? Why are you falling for this like creepy ass sleazeball? But the thing is, the only reason why, and this is something I realize, and I think people have to realize, is the only reason why it comes off that way is because it's written bad. Like, you can tell that's not the intention of the story, that the story is trying to say, oh, here's these two people that meet and fall in love. But George Lucas does not know how to write dialogue like that. I mean, I just think of how much better this whole movie could have been if he had someone else help him with the script and do the details and the dialogue, and someone else direct the fucking thing. Like, I think this could have been actually an amazing movie, just as good as the original, and I will say that. Like, when I go back to what I said about how the original trilogy is objectively better than the prequels, this is why. Bad dialogue, bad directing, story structure doesn't quite work or make sense. So had they had someone come in, work with Lucas, still have Lucas have the final say, it's his vision. I'm not saying take that away from him like Disney did, which was why we got the sequel bullshit. Sure, keep Lucas in control, but give him some really creative people to work with. Give him someone to help him with the story structure, help him with the script, help him with the dialogue, and someone else to fucking direct the goddamn actors who knows how to work with actors. And then I would go as far as to say that this movie could have been as great as maybe not Empire Strikes Back, that's a bit too high, but at least Return of the Jedi. And the first Star Wars film. I think it could have been as great as that had they actually had a different script writer and a different director. And I was just thinking that the whole time. Now, I do have to bring up this reoccurring argument that I've had for the past couple decades of my life with various people. And it's all a matter of opinion. It's Coke versus Pepsi, Star Trek versus Star Wars kind of thing. It's like, who cares? Just a matter of opinion. But that argument is, which is the worst prequel film? Is it Attack of the Clones, or is it The Phantom Menace? Now, before the Disney sequels came out, the argument was which is the worst Star Wars movie. But after them, that whole argument, that statement's a bit muddled. but which is, and of course the worst has to come from the prequel trilogy because it's objectively worse. So, and I think most people, except for a few scattering of people, will all agree that Revenge of the Sith is the best of the prequel trilogy. There's some oddballs out there that hate Revenge of the Sith, but I'll get to that next time. But yeah, most people agree Revenge of the Sith is the best, but people can't agree on what's the worst. Is it Phantom Menace or is it Attack of the Clones? And for me, I am very, very, very staunchly in the camp of it's the Phantom Menace. And I think I talked about that when I reviewed the Phantom Menace last year. And there's other people who really strongly disagree and say, no, it's not Phantom Menace, it's Attack of the Clones. Now, one of the reasons I've heard people give is, Phantom Menace has the pod racing scene. I'm like, I fucking hate the pod racing scene. That was boring. It went on for too long. I don't see that as a positive. I see that as a negative. And then other people were like, it has Darth Maul. Darth Maul is overrated. He was only a good character in Clone Wars and Rebels. In the actual movie, he's just he's like Oddjob. He's like a nameless henchman who shows up and goes around. He kills Qui-Gon Jinn and then promptly dies. He wasn't a real character. So I don't care how cool his fucking lightsaber looks. Like, I need actual characters to care about, and not nameless henchmen I don't give a fuck about. So no, Darth Maul did not make that movie great either. And of course, my biggest like arsenal, or biggest weapon in my arsenal, is fucking Jar Jar Binks, who is barely in Attack of the Clones and is big and annoying and just terrible in the Phantom Menace. Now, the counter I've seen for some people with that would be like, well, C-3PO is just as annoying in this film as Jar Jar was in Phantom Menace. And no, he wasn't. Don't get me wrong. C-3PO, the scenes with him going around saying, what a drag, when R2-D2 was dragging his head, was some really stupid shit. And it was really annoying and it was dumb. Was it anywhere near as bad, as annoying and dumb as the Jar Jar stuff? Not even close. Not even close. And it was obvious that George Lucas was kind of being spiteful, because it's like, because of the reaction to Jar Jar and how everyone hated him and everyone was railing on him and thought he was stupid. It's like, all right, fine, I'll take Jar Jar out, but I'm going to put C-3PO in and have him be the goofball. I'm like, okay, George, fine. But it's, those scenes were dumb, but they were not as dumb as Jar Jar. But the main thing I hear from people who say Attack of the Clones is worse is they point to the Anakin stuff. I don't like saying the creepy stalker looks. It's like he touched Padme's back out of nowhere without permission. It was just it makes my skin crawl. And and when they weren't even close, she wasn't into him at all, and then all of a sudden she's like, I truly deeply love you. It makes no sense. It's one of the most poorly written love stories ever, and I will agree with that. But there's a lot of other good stuff in this film. There is the whole battle sequence at the ending was top notch. Way better than that CGI diarrhea bullshit they had in Phantom Menace, or that Anakin Skywalker as a kid going up and accidentally blowing up a space station and being like, now this is pod racing. That's so stupid. So Phantom Menace was just so much worse. Everything about it, not just Jar Jar, but Jar Jar takes up so much of the goddamn film, and the Gungans, and the whole sloppy and boring way that the plot unfolds, it's and I don't give a fuck about Darth Maul. Those scenes weren't even that good. The music was great, but the most of this film, I would say, was really good. The Obi-Wan stuff was kind of, that was too, like, they didn't really explain it very well. It was just too, like, mystical, and they could have been handled that better. But like the scenes with, even though it features some terrible dialogue, but the scenes with Obi-Wan and Anakin at the start of the film when they're chasing after the bounty hunters trying to kill Padme, like, that was all really good stuff. And they had, like, funny moments when Obi-Wan is in the bar and this guy's like, want to buy some death sticks, and he uses the Jedi mind trick. It's like, you don't want to sell me death sticks. Like, that was great. Like, that was, like, really good humor, and some of the back and forth between Anakin and Obi-Wan actually did work, and not all of it was shit dialogue. Some of it actually did work. Some of it did show the camaraderie between these two characters. So yeah, it's very clear that given the first 6 movies, the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, Phantom Menace and this movie are clearly the worst two. They're clearly way below the other 4 movies. But I think this movie is very clearly not as bad as Phantom Menace. I think Phantom Menace is very clearly the worst. But that is just my humble opinion. The other thing I will say, another controversial statement, something I was thinking of while I was watching this, is I think that if I were to structure the prequel trilogy, this would be the first film in the prequel trilogy. That this should have been the first film. They just shouldn't have had the Phantom Menace at all. And there should have been, the second film should have taken place during the Clone Wars, where we see Anakin be the great Jedi that he always was, that Obi-Wan made him out to be. He's like my best friend, and he was he was a great person, he was a great Jedi. And then you have Revenge of the Sith, where he turns evil. Now, I know what some people who've seen the Clone Wars are thinking. Well, they did that in the Clone Wars cartoon, and God, Anakin is just so much better in the Clone Wars than he is in this film. Both movies, even Revenge of the Sith, this is like so much better. But we shouldn't have to wait a couple years to watch some cartoon. It should be in the movie, in the trilogy itself. I think The Phantom Menace was a waste of time. You don't really need to see the origin story of Darth Sidious, setting everything up. You can join the story at the point he's at, and you don't need to see, he planned this whole thing in Naboo so he could take power. Like, you don't need to go back that far. I think if you started his story here, it would still be great, and it would make a lot more sense. And you definitely don't need to see Anakin as a little kid. Like, that was just dumb. You don't need that 100%. And I know some people are thinking, well, then you wouldn't get Qui-Gon Jinn and how they found Anakin, and his thing was his prophecy, where he was like birthed by midichlorians or whatever, and that Qui-Gon died, and so Obi-Wan felt obligated to mentor him. And believe me, I agree those are all good things that strengthen the film. Are they 100% necessary? I don't think so. I think there is a way that they could have streamlined that information in. They could have cut out Qui-Gon Jinn, altogether, because even though Liam Neeson's great, but it's like what I was saying before about killing your babies. Like, if just because it looks cool or it's cool and you really like it doesn't mean it serves the overall story. And I think a lot of Phantom Menace is true. that applies. Like, you could have gotten rid of Qui-Gon Jinn, maybe find some other way to espouse the exposition that Anakin is the chosen one. Maybe get rid of metachlorians and not even have them at all. Just because everyone fucking hated them. Maybe that would have been better. Just throwing that out there. And yeah, you don't need to see fucking Anakin as a little boy and he shows up with Padme and she's like, oh, I remember you as this little boy. And he's like, well, I remember how beautiful you were and you look exactly as I remember in my dreams. Like, shut the fuck up, you little creep. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, so cut out Phantom Menace entirely. Anything that was, and there wasn't much, to be honest. Like, most of it you can just dump. But the few things that you do need that are vital for the story, just find some way to dump that information in the first part of this movie. And as I said, get a better writer and a better director. And so this movie would actually be, to make it actually be good. And then do the second movie of the Clone Wars, where we actually see the Clone Wars. I mean, come on. As it is, like, the trilogy, I think, is very poorly structured. You got that opening prequel where most of it's nonsense and bullshit. That the opening chapter, the first movie, that you don't need. And the second movie where the story really begins, in my opinion. And then you skip all the way to the end in The Revenge of the Sith, and you skip over a lot. In fact, the Clone Wars cartoon proved that, because there was so much there in the middle that just hopped, skipped, and a jumped right over. And so you only see Anakin being that true great Jedi that Obi-Wan was talking about in A New Hope for one scene in Revenge of the Sith, or one sequence, I should say. The first sequence of the movie when they're trying to rescue Palpatine from Dooku. After that, just him turning to the dark side. And in this film, you see that he's a moody teenager who doesn't take orders and is emo and doesn't want to listen to authority figures. Number one candidate to turn to the dark side. And so I think they overplayed their hand. So you needed to have that other film in between these that served the purpose that Clone Wars would do in retrospect. And it was kind of trying to correct the mistakes of what this trilogy originally did. But if the trilogy could have done it right in the first place, dump Phantom Menace. Don't fucking need that. Start with this film, make it better, and then do a second film where you see the Clone Wars at its height. You see them bond with the clones. You see Anakin become a wiser person who's not so meaty and like, I hate them, or whatever bullshit he was doing in this movie. Make him actually become wise like he did in the Clone Wars, a good Jedi warrior who's working with Obi-Wan. They're building a bond, and Obi-Wan comes to truly appreciate him as a great Jedi, and they encounter Dooku and get into fights and whatnot, and then go to Revenge of the Sith, which can pretty much stay the same. Pretty much. And boom! Trilogy would be way, way better. And the other thing, speaking of Dooku, is that as it is, you have Darth Maul, who, as I said, is just a nameless, faceless henchman who just shows up and gets in some fights and then dies. So who cares about him? And in the next film, you have Dooku, who doesn't even appear till towards maybe 70 or 80 minutes through the film, towards the end, and is there. She almost comes out of nowhere. It's because it was mentioned in that opening crawl, but other than that, it's I felt like I didn't really know who the fuck that was. And then you jump to the third movie, and Dooku dies within the first 20 minutes of the film, and then we pivot to this General Grievous fucker, a droid with 6 arms, and it's you should have a uniformed villain. The same way the original trilogy had Darth goddamn Vader, And you could say, well, Darth Vader was like the main guy. That's the purpose that Darth Sidious serves. No. Darth Sidious serves the same purpose in this trilogy as he did in the fucking original trilogy. He just appears a lot more. He's just, he's the Emperor. He's the mastermind. He wasn't the main villain in either this trilogy or the original one. There was no main villain who was uniform, which is what I'm saying is the problem. So make Dooku the actual main villain. So 86 Darth Maul. I'm sorry, I know fans of him. Oh no, he's not that good. I mean, the Clone Wars made him great, but he wasn't really the same character. They just made him up and made this character. But anyway, get rid of Darth Maul. So Dooku is introduced in this film, and maybe do a better job at introducing him, and sort of introduce him earlier in the film, and sort of like we get again talking about cartoons that made things better. There's the Tales of the Jedi thing that shows his backstory and how freaking Darth Sidious enticed him to the dark side, and how he was like, got into this conflict where the Jedi were doing the wrong thing. Like, find a way to put that into the film. It's possible. Don't say it's not possible. It's totally possible. They could find a way to sneak that in, and like maybe Yoda or Windu can like tell a story, and you have a flashback to Dooku or whatever, and have a way to build that origin story that made his character so much better. Find a way to put that into the film, and then build Dooku throughout the film, not just the fucking text crawl at the start of the film, but throughout the film, build him as this great villain. And so then when he appears, he can appear at the same time. When he does, we the audience would be, ooh, this is that badass they were talking about. This is a fucking Jedi master, and you would care more about him. You would be more worried about him. He would come off as more menacing. Whereas at the moment, it's like, I don't even know who this fucking guy is. Why should I care? And so if they did that for the first film, that would be amazing. And in the second film, make him the main villain. Make him the main villain of the Clone Wars. Explore his character more. Get into him a lot more. Explore that. Get into that. Get into the nitty gritty of it. And then we get into the third film. Just don't do fucking Grievous. He was dumb. Just keep Dooku. Have Dooku be the one that Obi-Wan fights on that planet in order to end the war. And maybe, I don't know, because you want to have freaking Palpatine test Anakin and be like, do it. And I get it. They wanted him to kill Sidious's apprentice so he could take over his apprentice, and he planned it that way. But I think, that's cool and that's good and works for the story, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. I think you could lose that and have some other way for Palpatine to test Anakin, make him do something that's a bit questionable. So just 86 Grievous and keep Dooku, and have Obi-Wan have to go to that planet and duel with Dooku, which would have been way more suspenseful and a lot more. I would care a lot more about that fight than his Grievous. I didn't really care about that Grievous thing where he's like, you fool, I've been trained in the Jedi arts by Count Dooku. Dooku, you mean that guy that just killed very easily at the start of the film? Woo! Anyway, it would have been a lot more intense, because he just kicked Anakin and freaking Obi-Wan's ass, ripped their arms off, and the previous film, and was barely able to beat Yoda. And so to have Obi-Wan go 1-to-1 with him, that would be a scary ass shit. And they could have made a very epic fight over that, and that would have been a billion times better than what they did with fucking Grievous. And also, in my version, you would have known Dooku a lot better. He would have been around since the first film. He would have been a major character in the second film. And have fucking Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's amazing. He did such a great job. And it's funny, it seems like George Lucas saw Lord of the Rings and was like, oh my god, that's such a great idea, putting Christopher Lee as the villain. Let me do that. But yeah, like, have him be the main villain through the trilogy, and then the third film, keeping toward that halfway point when Grievous dies, but have it be Dooku instead. Then you can focus on the Anakin stuff and the freaking Emperor taking over the thing. I think it would just been much better overall. But, Monday morning quarterbacking, as they say, is just things I was thinking about as I was watching this film. But, so, I don't know if I have much else to say about this film. I did the machete order once, which, by the way, leaves out the Phantom Menace, which is kind of why I like the machete order. If you've never heard of the machete order, I don't know if it's still around. It was around before the sequels came out. That it's the order to watch the Star Wars films. And I should have liked to watch it with these people, and one of them had never seen Star Wars before, and we watched it in the machete order. So you start with A New Hope, because that was meant to be where you start with Star Wars, and that introduces everything. Then you go to Empire Strikes Back, but then you go to Attack of the Clones, and then you do Revenge of the Sith, and then you do Return of the Jedi. And this kind of makes sense because at the end of Empire you learn that, Darth Vader is your father, oh my god. And then you go back and see, who was Anakin Skywalker? You see him as a young Jedi in Attack of the Clones, and then you see the Clone Wars start, and then you see the Clone Wars end, and you see Anakin turn evil and become the Emperor's apprentice. And it also builds up the Emperor, by the way, who's barely mentioned in the second film and just appeared as a floating head in that one scene. And it builds him up more and describes how the whole thing came about. And then you go back and watch the conclusion, Return of the Jedi, now having all that backstory, who Anakin is, who the Emperor is, and then you see Luke actually say there's still good in you. And it's actually a lot more powerful. But it's hard, since I've seen all these movies a billion times, it's hard for me to judge, even if I watch it in that order. It's how that would come off to someone who hadn't seen Star Wars before, or had barely seen Star Wars before. But I think it makes a lot of sense. But, yeah. One thing I will note is the one problem with Machete Order is going from Empire Strikes Back to Attack of the Clones. Whew! That is such a drastic change in quality. One of the best movies ever made. The hands down best Star Wars film, going from that to this. Now again, I don't think this movie's terrible. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think there's a lot of things about it that I love and a lot of things about it that work. But my God, going straight from Empire to this, such lesser quality. Just overall, it's a lot of CGI garbage nonsense, where Empire was more gripping, it was more personal, it was more gritty, it was more in your face. Whereas this is just a lot of boring stuff of Obi-Wan looking around for, who's Cypher Diaz and blah blah blah, and the terrible fucking romance scenes in the middle of the film. So that middle of the film sucks balls. But then you get to the end, which is good, which gets a lot better, but still not anywhere near the level of Empire Strikes Back. So that is the drawback of doing Machete Order, I will say, is that it is a sudden shift downward. It's going straight from Empire to this film. It's like grinding the gear. Anyway, speaking of Obi-Wan and his little quest, his little search, this is a major problem. It's a major flaw in the film. Now, apparently, because they drop a lot of names like Cypher Diaz and Lord Tyrannus, and they never really explain like what's going on with this, who actually created the clones, and what's the deal with all this. Apparently, it was George Lucas's original idea to explain it in the third movie, but then he decided, well, no, I'd rather focus on Anakin and get into that. And I actually agree with that decision, but the problem is he shouldn't have set it up, because by setting it up, you never pay it off. It seems like a bunch of a big, huge waste of time and just a bunch of confusing nonsense. Now, if you are screaming at me at this time saying, well, they explained it all in the Clone Wars, I know, and I'm going to get to that. But the Clone Wars, again, that came out years and years later. It was written in retrospect, kind of the same way that Rogue One was written to plug the plot hole in A New Hope about why the Death Star had such a fatal flaw. In that sense, the Clone Wars also did stuff a lot where they would plug plot holes in the prequels. And in this case, there was the plot hole of who the fuck is Cypher Diaz and Lord Tyrannus and all this bullshit, and why they create the clones, and what the hell's the deal with that. They do have an episode that explains all that, and I think it's a really good episode. Yes, absolutely is, Monday morning quarterbacking and like plugging a plot hole, something that Dave Filoni likes to do a lot. He's starting to do it now with the sequel trilogy and the newer shows. If you didn't notice, and to be fair, I think he's good at it. But he shouldn't have to do it if these films didn't have so many goddamn flaws. But anyway, but it's interesting. The Cypher Diaz apparently was a Jedi master who wanted the Republic. You could see all the threats to the Republic and wanted them to have an army, but no one agreed with them. Yoda and everyone was like, no, we shouldn't do that. So he went in secret to the Camino, the comedians, no, whatever they're called, the Caminios. He went to them to create this clone army in secret, but the Sith, Mr. freaking Darth Sidious, found out about this, and so they found Cypher Diaz and killed him. Apparently, Count Dooku got like the Pikes to do it or whatever, paid the money to do it, and so they killed Cypher Diaz and then hijacked the project that Cypher Diaz put into place with the clone armies, and hired Jango Fett to be the template for all the clones, and did that inhibitor chip that would turn them evil once they activated Order 66, would make them turn on the Jedi and kill them all. And apparently Cypher Diaz's original idea was for that chip was to have it so to make them like the exact opposite, make them so they could never hurt Jedi. So that's kind of ironic. And Darth Sidious hijacked that to make it so that they killed the Jedi. And so then the question is, who is this Lord Tyrannus they're talking about? Well, that's Count Dooku. That's the name he went by when he went to the community, whatever that fucking place is called, the Cloners. Went to them and told them to, do the inhibitor chip and all this bullshit. So they knew him as Lord Tyrannus. And anyone who's a bigger Star Wars nerd than me can feel free to correct me if I got anything wrong. I only saw this episode once. It was over a year ago, and I just quickly read through a Wikipedia page. But from my understanding, that's pretty much how it went. And that makes it so much better. That makes it make so much sense. But it needed to be in the fucking film. We shouldn't have to wait 9 years for a goddamn cartoon to explain what should have been in the goddamn film. Sorry, but not sorry. It doesn't make this film better. It makes the cartoon better. I know the cartoon's trying so hard in retrospect to make these flawed movies better, but they don't. This is because you have to have required, reading or whatever, extra reading in order to understand a film, which you never should do. Which is something I'm going to talk a lot about when I get to J.J. Abrams, but not there yet. Anyway, Abrams. I think J.J. Abrams is a terrible director, just overall. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. A couple years away from that. Anyway, one of the scenes I found really interesting was, and again, it shows just how stupid Jar Jar is, and I get that. He isn't a moron. Why the fuck are you having him take Padme's place while she goes off? But anyway, like, Padme's whole thing was like, we have to block the militarization of the Republic. We cannot let them, build an army and everything. The second she's gone, freaking Palpatine goes to what's his face, Jar Jar Binks, and I was like, oh, I want to create an army of the Republic. If only Senator Amidala was here, she would be brave enough to support me. When this is the exact opposite is true. She would be the first and strongest voice opposing you. Now, you might say, well, Jar Jar's an idiot. He's going to fall for that bullshit because he's an idiot, which is absolutely 100% fair. But Senator Organa and all these other people who knew Padme were also in that room, and they should have spoken up and be like, the fuck you talking about? Like, she would be the first to oppose you. And they should have objected to that. And so, I don't know. And a lot of people make jokes about how Jar Jar is the one who doomed the he's the one that helped the Empire be built because he's the one that gave emergency powers to the Chancellor who, never gave up that power and then eventually became the Emperor. It all started with Jar Jar. It's all his fault. And then I don't even get into the Jar Jar Binks, Darth Jar Jar conspiracy theory. That's fun. And it's funny. It's great to joke around about that, but it doesn't have a lick of credibility, unfortunately. But as funny as Misa Sith, it's funny. I will grant you that. It is very funny. But anyway, I know most people don't take it seriously, but I think some do, and they shouldn't. Absolutely should not. But anyway, oh God, Yoda fighting with his lightsaber at the end and doing flips. I've heard a lot of people, especially the prequel haters, complain to the tilts about that. Oh, how stupid is that? It's just a CGI Yoda going around doing black back flips and it looks dumb and it's out of character for Yoda and doesn't make any sense. He was never a lightsaber fighter. He's better at other things in the Force, and it just looks cheesy and they ruined Yoda by doing it. Blah, blah, blah. And here's what I say. I remember seeing this movie in the theater. I don't think I went on opening day because after Phantom Menace, my hype for this movie was not that strong. In fact, I was more into Lord of the Rings films at the time because they were coming out at the same time. All the way 22 years ago. Oh my God, I just want to fucking... Oh, back in my day. It makes me feel so goddamn old. 22 years ago. This film came out. But anyway, I remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember when we got to the scene where Yoda gets into the lightsaber fight with Dooku and starts doing all those flips, the fucking theater went crazy. And mind you, as I said, this was not opening night. I think it was like maybe the next day it opened, so it was still, this theater was packed. And it was still a lot of fans there, but it wasn't like a 12 o'clock showing or anything like that. And still, like, when Yoda started flipping, I remember this was in Portland. It's when I used to live in Portland. But anyway, Yoda started flipping around, doing all those, lightsaber things. Everyone lost their shit and was like cheering. I was like, "Oh my god, this is so awesome!" And I could feel the energy in the theater, and just how everyone was like so excited by that, and it made me, "Oh my god, this is amazing! This is one of the best things." I can now die because I've seen Yoda do backflips with the lightsaber. It's so good. And here's the thing. Fuck y'all, I still feel that way. All the haters out there was like, "Oh, it looks so dumb and stupid CGI, and Yoda would never act like that." I'm like, who cares? It's fucking awesome. Let me eat my fucking candy. let me have my chocolate sundae. Just leave me alone while I'm eating my beautiful, delicious chocolate sundae of Yoda jumping around doing backflips. Sorry, just let me have this. It's awesome, and just enjoy it. So I still feel that way about it. I still like it, and I still think I think that whole ending sequence was really good. The stuff in the arena with the animals fighting Obi-Wan, that did drag just a tad. Not to say drag, I think of that fucking C-3PO saying, "Whoa, this is such a drag." God damn it. That's so dumb. Like, that was the main fault in the final action scenes, by the way, was the C-3PO. They absolutely needed to object. George Lucas just did that to fuck with the audience. I'm convinced about that. So, "Oh, you hate Jar Jar, huh? So let me make C-3PO annoying as fuck during these action sequences." But anyway, God. Oh yeah, what else was the other one when R2 put his head next to his body? Is like, I'm just beside myself. I'm like, Jesus Christ, just shut up, oh my god. And it's still not as bad as Jar Jar, just to be clear. Like, nothing can be as bad as Jar Jar. But but anyway, but other than that, like the whole Windu coming in and like, have chopping off Jango Fett's head, and all the Jedis in the freaking arena going crazy with all the freaking droids and everything, and then they get surrounded and appear to be defeated, but then Yoda shows up with the clones, and they're like, "Ah, Yoda's here," and they get into a fight, and then they chase after Dooku, and then they had that awesome final confrontation, and Anakin is not disciplined enough, and him and Obi-Wan get their fucking asses kicked, and Anakin gets his arm chopped off, but then Yoda shows up and is able to fucking like stand up to Dooku, which again, fucking amazing. That's all good. That was all good. Like, I think that's, to me, all of that automatically makes it a better film than Phantom Menace. I mean, that Darth Maul, Qui-Gon Jinn fight, the musical is good. And it was okay. I'm not saying it was bad, but this is like way better. Sorry, it just is. And of course, it doesn't have all the bullshit that was in the first film. But anyway, so yeah, that was all really good stuff with seeing them finally take things back. But now, let me talk about the clone army, because, and so I saw this meme that summarized this pretty nicely, where it was like, I can't remember exactly how the meme went, but it was something along the lines of like Obi-Wan saying to Windu when they're at the arena thing, or maybe it wasn't Windu, but Obi-Wan just pointing out when he sees Jango Fett up with on that balcony with the Viceroy and Count Dooku and all the evil people. He goes, "Hey, that's the guy who created the clone army, and he's working with the Separatists. Therefore, the clone army was created to hurt the Jedi and not help them." And it cuts to credits. It shows the credits. Trilogy over. They figured out that and it does seem like they accept the clones too easily. Like, they were very much against building clones in the first place, apparently, and they were against the Republic having an army, and all of a sudden there was like Obi-Wan was investigating this like mystery. It's like, where did these clones come from? Who did it? Why did they do it? What's going on with these clones? They just appeared out of nowhere. Who's creating them? And they were like, fuck it. Who cares about any of that? Let's just use them. and it was, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Like, why would the Jedi do that? Why would they not be suspicious of these clones from the start? And especially seeing Jango Fett up there, like the one who masterminded the clones. All the clones are based off him. He's like trying to kill all the Jedi and working with the Separatists. Wouldn't that give them like a slight little hint that something was wrong with these fucking clones? I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Anyway, so yeah, you had some more bad dialogue scene with Obi-Wan yelling at Anakin when Anakin wants to go back for Padme because she fell out the helicopter or whatever, and he wanted to go back, and Obi-Wan's just like, "You will be expelled from the Jedi Order." I'm like, aren't you being a bit overly dramatic there, Obi? Like, calm the fuck down. I don't know. But anyway, I think that's pretty much all I gotta say about this film. So, my rating for Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, out of 10, is going to be a 6. Good. Yeah, I was going back and forth about what rating to give this film. Should I give it a negative rating? It was very close to, but then I was like, I think that ending sequence was really good. And here's the thing. I think, as I said, the whole idea of this film and the next film was really good about this is how a dictator manipulates power and he manipulates people. And it's very subtle and it's very complex and it's very cautionary tale to real life. And it was very masterful the way it was all rooted in the story of these films. So I gotta give them an A for effort for that. But its execution has a fucking lot to be desired, unfortunately. As I said, the directing was terrible. Some of the dialogue was terrible. It had great actors turn out bad performances. And Hayden Christensen was unjustly judged as a terrible actor because of these films, because most people had only seen him in these films. I just saw him a couple of other indie films, like Glass, and there was like this other one, I can't remember what it was called, but he's actually a good actor. And then you see him later on in Ahsoka, and you're like, and all the people were just learning for this first time, like, hey, he's actually a good actor. And yeah, if he's working with a good director, he can be a good actor. If he's working with a shit director, then he can give it, and with shit dialogue, then not such a good of an actor, and it's not really his fault. So, yeah, anyone who says this is better than any of the films in the original series is just flat out wrong. They're objectively wrong. I'm sorry. I know I might sound arrogant to say that, being like, oh, I'm a hipster or just an old, grumpy old Gen Xer. I'm really more of a millennial than Gen X, but kind of in between. But regardless, you're just this old, grumpy Gen Xer who thinks that anything that came out in the 70s, 80s is better than anything that came out in modern times. Blah, 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 blah. But it's not true. It's just looking at it from a objective, like, craft perspective. There's so much wrong with this film, especially compared to the original trilogy, which I admit, as I mentioned in that video, not as amazing as everyone's giving out to be. It has its own flaws, except for Empire, which is a fucking masterpiece. But anyway, it has its own flaws, but not as much as this film. But still, as I said, there's so much good in this that it deserves a 6. And it's mainly for what they were trying to do. I get what they were trying to do with the romance. It's just, it was written very terribly. I get what they're trying to do with the mystery of who Cypher Dyas is and this Darth Sidious pulling the strings. Like, that's really good what they're trying to do. They just didn't quite get there. But also, not just that, it's what they actually did with the whole fighting sequence at the end of the film. And also when Anakin lost his mother, that was really powerful too. I kind of liked how that was handled as well. So So I do think they did a lot of good right. Enough for me to enjoy this film. Don't think it's a masterpiece, but I will definitely think it's deserving of a 6 out of 10. And way better than Phantom Menace, by the way. Anyway, that is it for my review of Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. I guess I'll see you again next year when I cover Revenge of the Sith, one of my favorite Star Wars movies. Easily the best movie of the prequel trilogy. Next May the 4th. But in the meantime, you can check out my channel. I've done reviews of a lot of Star Wars stuff. I've covered Ahsoka, The Bad Batch, Rebels, Clone Wars. As I said, the first 4 movies that came out before this one. And a lot of other stuff. And of course, at the moment, my main focus of the channel, of course, is Star Trek. I am more of a Star Trek guy, to be fair. And I'm covering Star Trek The Next Generation episode by episode, currently in season 4. So be sure to check out my channel. Be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.